Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm so excited to be joined here by Taylor. She's the business development manager over at Rocket Station. They do so many great things when it comes to hiring support for our growing businesses. So thank you for being here, Taylor. Really excited to talk about hiring mistakes and pros and cons and just best practices. Because
Yeah,
I can't tell you how many women in our community struggle with this very topic, even at the point where they're basically procrastinating on bringing somebody in because they just don't want to deal with it, right? They don't want to deal with all the thinking that has to go to having to bring someone into their team. But I know probably in the chat box, I'd love to see in the chat box right now, how many of you know it is time to expand your team and you've been a little nervous or reluctant to do that because of a past experience or just because you're just don't want to have to deal with people that don't work, for all the various reasons. I'd love to see in the chat box. Yeah. So Sarah, you can empathize. But I jumped right in. Taylor, thank you again for being here so much.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Liz, and good to meet everybody virtually. And hopefully I've met some of you at the live event a few months ago. But thank you for having us. We're excited to kind of hop in and provide some of the little tips and tidbits of really what makes the virtual staff workplace so successful.
And something that we do for all of our webinars, I'd love to hear from each of you. What is something you want to learn about? So if you can just put in the chat box, what your name is, and obviously, what do you want to learn? What are you looking? What is your intention for the call? I think often, Taylor, people join calls not really sure what they're going to talk about, not really sure why they're there. And I know many of you all of you really are busy women doing a lot. And the purpose of these webinars is that you learn something and then you do something with what you learned. And the good news is that we work with Rocket Station. They aren't just like a sponsor, they're a preferred partner. And we really look to them as a partner to say, okay, what's coming up for people? What's the right education? And then what are the right resources to move forward? So we take that pretty seriously. So I'd love to hear from some of you. What is something that you want to learn about today, whether it's a challenge or struggle when it comes to costly mistakes when hiring? Because I know we all can get better with this. So love to see that in the chat box. Hey, Shandell, we're getting close to needing a hire VA, and I want to go into the process as informed as possible. Right. I know, I'm sure, Taylor's going to speak to that, and she's got a really cool 30-day checklist. I'm sorry, it's a 30-day checklist, right? Onboarding,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
onboarding is probably the biggest thing, not to get into your presentation, but people struggle with. So really onboard the people that you're hiring. So very cool. So with that, I'm going to give you the floor, Taylor. And thanks again so much for being here. And all right, cool. Sarah, tips for documenting ops manual for VA. Something
Yep.
that, and I have to just say really quickly, Taylor, when you and I first talked about the work that you're doing at Rocket Station, one of the things I really appreciated a lot about Rocket Station is that they do that very thing. Very into SOPs, very much so, because some of us don't want to have to deal with that. And I really loved what Taylor, you guys are doing to set the entrepreneurs up for success. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll get into that today, but
Yep.
thanks
That's
again for
part of
being
it.
here. Yeah, thanks for everyone being here. And let's jump in here. I'll give you the floor there, Taylor.
Awesome. Let me share my screen and then we'll go into presentation mode. All right. Can everyone, Liz, I can only see you. You want to give me a thumbs up if you, yeah, we got it. Okay. All right. So, and I also, I do have a coworker here, Barbara. I'll introduce her in a second. So Barb, you should be able to unmute and talk when you need to. So we're going to kind of go about this, in a way that
Actually,
hopefully,
Taylor, let me just quickly ask you. It's Barb Kaplan.
yep. Yes,
Okay, let
ma'am.
me let me just promote her to a panelist so she can actually very easily jump
Perfect.
in here. My apologies. I should have done that. Let me
No,
see.
all good.
Okay, there she is. Okay, and
There
I'm
she
going
is.
to promote her as a co-host as well. So sorry about that.
No, all good. All good. Thank you.
Hi, Barb.
Hey Liz, so nice to meet you and nice to meet
Nice,
everybody on the call.
nice to meet you. Thanks for all your help. But I will stop talking, give you guys the floor.
All good. Okay. Thank you, Liz. So really, we're going to go into a couple of the big pain points that individuals see when they are hiring a virtual assistant. Now, we're going to go about this a couple different ways because, as you guys know, there are different ways to hire somebody, right? So there's, hiring directly, a third-party manager, going on Upwork. So we're going to try to touch on the pros and cons of all of them and sort of the route that you need to take and the questions you need to ask yourself to decide which route is best for you. We have heard over and over, as Liz mentioned, from people in your position, how difficult it is to find reliable and affordable talent. Those are the two big needs, right? Reliability and affordability. And it definitely is hard to find qualified candidates who do not end up costing you more time and more money than the actual value they provide. So that is hopefully what we're going to address today, where we're going to try to give you some really clear, actionable concepts that are intended to save you as much time and money as possible as you move forward with the hiring process. So meet your team. So Taylor, Business Development Executive at Rocket Station. I've been here for about 7 years with Rocket Station. I started in the operations side. I was actually director of ops for about 4 years, and that's really where we were building out the bulk of what we do at Rocket Station. And that's where all my knowledge comes from on how to actually implement a VA. So I switched to the sales side of things about 2 years ago. And we've really been hitting the ground running from an educational standpoint. And then, of course, selling our own virtual assistant partnerships. And then Barbara here is our director of sales and partnerships. Barb, if you want to hop in.
Yeah, so Taylor, thank you for the introduction. So I have been at Rocket Station just about a year, but I think, fortunate of how I got here was that I was working for a software company and we were working with Rocket Station to help us with some of our internal processes. So I got to see firsthand what Rocket Station does and the power of the virtual assistants. And I think, as Liz said, and we've talked about, and we're going to talk about a lot more, the process documentation and all that, because I lived it firsthand as we were implementing software. So I had an opportunity to make a career change and got to come over. And I have learned a ton from Taylor. So I'm going to turn it back to her and we will get through this. And I think you all are going to learn a lot. And we're excited to be here.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you. All right, so we'll hop in a real quick overview of some of the things that we're hoping you'll take away from today. So we kind of broke this up into 3 different sections. So the first is how to maximize your profitability by hiring a real estate specific virtual assistant. And then the keys to selecting the right person for your ventures. So obviously you're going to need a different type of candidate with different skill sets, personality traits, depending on what industry you're in. It's extremely helpful to find a resource that is real estate specific. And then we will go through why, to the question that came up earlier, why process development is critical to success, to long-term success, not only of your virtual assistant, but also to your business as a whole. We'll go through what tasks you can delegate, how to identify KPIs or key performance indicators, and hold your team accountable to those. And then, of course, everyone's favorite piece is what the cost savings will look like. Okay, and then we're going to kind of go through a couple of the different ways that you would actually start with hiring a virtual assistant. Because if you've searched online on Google or Facebook, I'm sure you have been bombarded with ads that are actually showcasing, different companies, Rocket Station, probably competitors to Rocket Station, Upwork, Fiverr. There are hundreds of different options to actually hire, and not all of those hiring options are created equally. So what you really need to know when you're looking at your available options, there's 4 primary ways that you can hire a virtual assistant. So the first is a third-party placement agency. That's kind of like what we describe ourselves as at Rocket Station. We're there to hold your hand through the process, right? Then you've got a direct hire, which is you're just adding somebody as an independent contractor, or you're 1099ing somebody. You're finding them yourself. You have no outside assistance there. Then there is the call center type of setup, right? And this is, if you've got 10 properties and you need some after hours maintenance phone work and you don't want to hire somebody that's full-time just working for you, you can't justify the cost there. You might go to a call center and have an undedicated team of staff members, right, answering the phones for you. And then the fourth option is a project-based freelancer, so like Upwork, Fiverr. There's also some instances where you might go to somebody who does kind of like a call center setup, but it is more of a project-based setup. So maybe you need a transaction coordinator, but you're going to go to a company who charges you based on transaction or property rather than hiring a dedicated virtual assistant. So again, a multitude of different options. We'll kind of hop into the pros and cons of those options in the next slide. All right, Barb, take it away.
Yep, exactly. So we're going to kind of go through, as Taylor went through, the 4 different options. And let's talk first about the direct hire. So that, again, like Taylor said, that's somebody you hire directly. It may be somebody knows somebody. These will even happen. We'll talk to people that do hire people, that are overseas because they know somebody who has a virtual assistant, who has a friend that knows somebody who wants a job. But, the biggest thing here when you are doing that direct hire is that is leaving all of the recruitment, identifying those candidates, screening them, leaving that up to you. And also then, because you're hiring them directly, you're going to have to deal with all of the HR and the tax liability, and you're going to have to develop and implement your own SOPs, all of those processes. And it's a financial commitment. And this is the one where I always ask people, when you do this, what happens the first day when they get on the call with you? And it's like, oh, hey, I'm your new virtual assistant. And you all kind of look at each other like, okay, well, what are we going to do now? And how are you really going to manage them? So to kind of avoid that, a couple other things we can do. Next one is, as Taylor mentioned, Upwork, Fiverr, some of the project-based companies. So what's good about those is, it's flexible. You could hire them for a job, for a specific assignment, and there's no commitment on either side. So say you really only need them for a month or two, you can hire them for that. Challenges there and the cons really are that person, because you're hiring them for such a short period of time, they're not going to be dedicated to you. They may be working 2 hours a day with you, 2 hours a day with somebody else. They're not going to know your business. So it's a little harder to manage them, hold them accountable. And I think that lack of commitment is really where it makes it harder to make sure you're getting the work that you need done. Third-party agency, so that's basically companies like Rocket Station. So the big thing with companies like that, the biggest pro, well, there's a lot of them, but we'll go in the order they are on here, is that there's no HR or employee liability because you're going to get billed on an hourly basis. You will get billed from companies such as ours as just a general office expense, so you don't have to worry about any of that. We are going to shoulder the burden of all the candidate identification. We're going to screen them. We're going to find the right candidates for you and let you pick from those. So as opposed to, running an ad and getting 50 candidates, you're going to work with us and we're going to give you the 2 or 3 that we think are right for you. Big thing was like probably now the third time we talked about it, so everybody's going to know this is such a benefit, is the SOPs and the training materials are done for you. With companies such as ours, you're going to get ongoing managerial support. So this isn't just a one and done or set it and forget it that you hire somebody from us and you never hear from us again. What we're going to do is provide you a layer of support to make sure that you are successful and your VAs are successful. And then flexibility and scalability. Because once we've got your processes all documented, it's easy for you to scale. We don't have to go through this every time you hire somebody if you need to make changes. The biggest con about this would be, as compared to potentially a direct hire, would be it is a little bit of a higher cost. Um, so but again, the benefits you get from that really should outweigh that. And in this case, it's really the middleman situation. So they are your employees. They look, act, and feel like your employees. And basically, we help you manage them. The other one, which Taylor mentioned as well, is we call it the plug-in service or the call center. That was the example of you need somebody to take after hours calls for you to help you with scheduling on these off hours. The challenge with that is when you go into something that is like a call center situation, people don't know your business. They're not dedicated to you. You have no control over the culture of that employee. And I always kind of try to use the example that, the phone rings and there's a bunch of people, let's say, imagine, and that phone is rotating and they pick up the first call and it's somebody that wants to schedule a dental appointment. Then the next call is somebody's calling about collections, and then somebody calls on your line. So people are not completely dedicated to what you're doing. They're working for a number of different companies, so it's really hard to hold them accountable and manage them because you've got minimal control. Just imagine they're all sitting in a call center and the calls are just bouncing all over. Hope that makes sense. Taylor, I forget anything on that?
Nope, spot on. Spot on.
Okay. All right. So before you decide to outsource, and a lot of you are on the call, and we saw the couple people that already mentioned they're thinking about it, is really think about, how many hours that you need to hire for. So, is it part-time? Is it full-time? And if you really come to where you need full-time, it really becomes a great choice for you and a good financial option for you. So think about that. And then think about the kind of skills you need. And one of the nice things about hiring a virtual assistant is that we can look for people for you that are well-rounded in their skills. And a lot of times when we talk to investors and people such as yourselves, we'll almost come in and say, it's almost like, do you need a hybrid role? Because you need some executive admin help, but you need the transaction coordinating when it comes on. You need the schedule. You may need some marketing help. So think about the different skills that you need. And generally, you're going to see that hiring a virtual assistant will be able to give you that well-rounded individual. And then, how quickly do you need help? Because, any of you who have gone out and hired directly, you may run an ad, you put it on the internet, you've then got to coordinate all those interviews. And this process can take weeks till you sit down, figure out what your job description, get these people coordinated. And then the other big thing on this is, once you find somebody, do they need to give a 2-week notice? Or is it going to delay your hiring? So if you need to hire somebody quickly and want to move, when you work with an agency or company such as ours, we are going to have a bench or a group of people ready for you that can start once we get your processes documented. So really, as you're making these decisions, again, think about how many hours you need, the skills that you need, and then how quickly do you need to get staffed up.
Awesome. Yeah. And to Barbara's point, it really does. One of the biggest questions that we see come through from individuals in your current position is when you're ready to scale, what that sort of looks like. So to Barb's point about the hourly commitment, a third party dedicated staffing company like us, we're there for when you need somebody a full-time or a part-time, like minimum 20 hours a week, right? It's not that project-based setup. So if you do only need a few hours each week, it might not be worth going to a third party like us, right? It might be more beneficial for you to go to Upwork or find somebody who is a bit more project-based until you are ready to scale. So it really is about finding what your needs are in the moment and finding the right fit for that, rather than just jumping into something that you might not be ready for. So that's why we say those are 3 of some of the most common questions to start with. There is just determining really where the right fit is. And then if you have decided to move forward with a virtual assistant, regardless of if it's going to be direct hire, Upwork, third party, how are you going to select the right virtual assistant for you? So to jump in, there's really, the terminology we like to use is will versus skill. So if you think about the will somebody has, it's how motivated a virtual assistant or any of us are to really complete their tasks or a particular role. You can think of things like enthusiasm, commitment, initiative. Those are some keywords that go along with the will mindset. Versus the skill mindset is technical ability, experience. It's really like how competent an individual is at completing a particular role or responsibility. So we really like to look at will versus skill, because you might have a room full of 10 people with the same skill sets. And if 9 out of 10 of them don't have the will to actually complete the work, then 9 out of 10 are irrelevant, right? Regardless of what their skills look like. So what we do, this is definitely a question you want to ask yourself when you are interviewing, is to kind of gauge the will and the skill of everybody. But if you do go through a third party, it's important to take a look at what their sort of recruitment and pre-training process looks like, because if they're taking the time to answer this question for you, you will never have an issue where you've got a skillful employee who's not willing to do the work, right? So at Rocket Station, we do a 4 to 6 week real estate specific upskilling program. And during that process, we're really honing in on everybody's individual skill set, but then also their will to complete that graduation program, right? So that we can say when it comes time to endorse somebody, they've got the skill set, we've proven that through the technical tests, but then they also had the will to show up to that training program every day and to complete the work so that they were able to be hired. So that's a really important balance, is finding somebody with the proper motivation and skill set. Okay. Now, these are some universal skills to look for in a virtual assistant, again, regardless of which route you go. So communication is obviously one of the largest points here, especially when you're outsourcing from another country. So there is often a lot of questions around, should I outsource to Mexico, to the Philippines, to India? There's numerous options. Again, it really comes down to what you need that individual for. We find all of our virtual assistants at Rocket Station are in the Philippines, and that's a very good customer service type of position. It's a very good data entry type of position. The communication is key here because they are raised speaking English, and there's minimal to no noticeable accent. Now, if you're hiring for say a bookkeeper, maybe accent doesn't matter to you, so location doesn't matter as much. But regardless, they do need to be able to communicate with you as their, we'll call it employer in quotation marks, depending on how you hire. So effective communication is absolutely essential. Reliability is absolutely essential, especially in the virtual workplace. That reliable virtual assistant will help you build a solid foundation, not only for that individual, but for the business operation as a whole. Then self-motivation is, again, especially critical in a virtual workplace. These virtual assistants are going to be working independently, right? Without your direct physical supervision. So you really do need to find somebody who's self-motivated. And then detail orientation is a big one, again, because of the virtual workplace. It is critical that they are paying very, very clear attention to detail, whether that is through a data entry position, a transaction coordinator position, whatever it is. All of those errors come into play when it's human error, and that's really what determines the success of the virtual assistant, is how attentive they are to the work that they're performing. So those are 4 of the biggest universal skills that we personally at Rocket Station look for in our candidates, and how I would absolutely recommend that you guys look for if you are hiring directly or through another third party.
All right, now I think we're going to talk a little bit about sample questions, and Taylor actually started this with some of the examples she gave previously. Is when you're interviewing a third-party agency, when you're talking to a company, these are some really good questions. I'm going to go over some of them. You may want to even screenshot these because it's a pretty rounded out group of questions. Obviously Taylor talked about how we source in the Philippines, but you want to know where are these companies sourcing your teammates, and what does that recruitment process look like? What are the requirements on education, on English proficiency? Are they doing background checks? And then even more important, or just as important, is do the VAs undergo any additional training or upskilling? So, as Taylor mentioned, we put our VAs through 4 to 6 weeks worth of real estate training before they're even available to talk to you. What's the average tenure? What's the company culture look like? Because you have to remember, these people, they are going to, again, look, act, and feel like your employees. So you want to understand, what the culture is they're coming from, and make sure that it's going to be a culture fit for you. Ask them, don't be afraid to ask who their current clients are. Ask for references. That's not on here, but I always say ask for references as well. And then what you're going to want to do to understand really the philosophy and of the company that you're hiring to do the staffing is how do they identify the best VAs? What is their process? Kind of, it's like a dating service almost. How do we know we've got all this pool of candidates? How are we going to find you the perfect match, or the perfect date, the perfect employee? What does the onboarding look like? How are they going to support you? So again, when I mentioned before, you get on the phone the first day and you all look at each other like, who's doing what? So what sort of onboarding support are they going to provide you? You're hiring a company, so no different than if you were hiring a landscaper or signing a contract with another company. Is what's the contract look like, and what are the requirements? What's your commitment? And biggest question is, will I be stuck if I have a VA that's not performing? What are my options? Do I have to keep this VA forever? Or do they get replaced? Can I get out of the contract? So you want to work with a company that's going to be flexible with you and get you the right people when you need them. And again, how do we know if they're the right people if we're not monitoring them? So you want to understand truly how they're monitoring the VAs. And then again, if there is a problem because they are people, what happens if you need to make a replacement? Am I going to have to wait for weeks? Can that be done within a couple of days? What are their policies to get you the right candidate if there is an issue with a candidate? So those are really some of the things. Think about those questions when you are talking to a company because you want to look and make sure it's a right fit for your company as well. So now I think we're going to talk a little bit about questions now to ask during the interview. So this is now we're going to talk, you're going to be talking to these virtual assistants because all these companies should give you an opportunity to interview them, or even if you're direct hiring, just really good questions to ask. Obviously you want to know about their previous experience. Talk to them about their skills. Is there anything that's not on their resume? What do they do? What do they like? Talk to them about, how they feel about working remote, about their work environment. What do they like about working remotely? What do they not like about working remotely? Their work style, which is going to be super important because this is remote. So, what is their preferred communication method? Do they want to hop on a call in the mornings and get their tasks? Are they good with, communicating through Slack? But so you all are in sync as to how they work the best and how you're going to be able to manage them remotely to their work style. Problem solving, ask the questions, how do one of the questions I always tell people to ask is, let's say your virtual assistant's working and you're offline at the time and they get a question or a problem. How are they going to think? How are they going to react to keep your customer happy and satisfied with the answer that they gave them? And motivation, obviously, how are they motivated in the workplace? We talk about that, we hire from the Philippines. The Filipino culture is probably one of the most caring, sweetest people in the world. And Taylor always says, if you love your VAs, they're going to love you back. So how are they motivated? And generally, you're going to see a lot of it is just celebrate the successes and be kind. And then learning, how do they prefer to learn? So that that if you've got something new that they need to do, that you're going to do it in a way that's effective for everybody. So those are just some good questions, I think, to ask during the interview process.
Okay, so hopefully that kind of gave a clear understanding of how to find the right virtual assistant, the different options, and then some of the most common questions you should be asking either the partner that you're working with or the virtual assistant directly. So now we're going to hop into the second section, which starts the conversation around that process documentation question. So once you've really identified the best virtual assistant for your team, the second piece of the puzzle, if you will, is onboarding them efficiently to really set your partnership up for success. So this has become we hone in on this to painfully at Rocket Station is the process development phase, because it truly does make or break your partnership with your virtual assistant. So, and to kind of hone this point in even more, there was a study done and it stated that the lack of a clearly defined process and scope of work is the number one reason 87% of companies trying to leverage a virtual assistant fail. So it is across the board. It's not niche specific or industry specific. It is just virtually specific. So the reality for most business owners, business leaders, for you guys, is that the majority of your daily operations live in your head, right? Because we're not Fortune 500 companies that have had the bandwidth to document all of our processes. So the goal of process documentation is quite literally just to translate what is in your head to paper so that it is replicable by your virtual assistant or your in-person staff, right? It's just to take what's in your head and put it on paper, create a streamlined, documented process. Now, the first step in this process is to make a list of the responsibilities you're going to assign. Make a list of the repetitive tasks that weigh you down, but don't necessarily require you as the high-level individual in your company to complete. So, and another point is you really do have to be honest with yourself. I think it's tough, especially probably for the women in this room, to give up control of their company because it's your baby, right? I mean, if you've got a side business of any kind, you know how difficult it is to hand off the responsibilities. But to put it bluntly, it is a necessary evil. You're going to have to get over it because you will not be able to scale unless you're willing to give up some of those responsibilities. And it's not just women, right? That's for men too. Across the board, this is one of the issues we see is that, somebody knows they need help, but they're not quite emotionally ready to give up the reins. So you do have to be honest with yourself and learn to let go of some of that control so that you can scale. So on this page here, you'll see a couple different responsibility identification points and process development points. Now, this depends what route you go. If you are doing this on your own, it's tedious, right? You're going to really have to dedicate the time and the commitment to completing your processes. And I cannot recommend enough that you do this before you decide to hire a virtual assistant, unless you plan on going with a third party. If you plan on going with a third party who will do this for you, then don't waste your time, right? You're paying for it anyway. But if you're going to hire directly or hire Upwork or something like that, get it down on paper. Just get it down. It will save you time, money, stress, energy in the future. Okay, so what does process development actually solve? So again, the purpose here is to translate the how from your head onto paper, and every little detail of your process should go into your standard operating procedures. Now, if you think about the experiences that you have had when you plug into a new job at a new company, what did that look like for you? Did they hand you a guidebook and it was super clear? You felt like you could plug right into that and complete the process A to Z without any guidance? Or were you sitting there twiddling your thumbs? You didn't know what to do and you were wasting time and therefore wasting their money, right? It's the same sort of concept. And when you pair that with a virtual workplace, it becomes even more important. So some of the problems that process development really solves is if you don't have time to sit there and train side by side live training, you don't have time to babysit your virtual assistant, right? You're not hiring to add another responsibility on, you're hiring to take responsibility away. It, of course, allows for scalability because as you grow, your team will grow, and then you want to make sure everybody is following the same processes, so you don't have to retrain a new hire every time you're ready to scale. And then it also takes you out of the day-to-day, right? It takes you out of the filling out the forms, the doing the social media posting. It allows you to really take a step back, be the visionary, act as the business owner, act as the business leader that you were intended to be, right? And you got to get out of the weeds. And again, that comes back to the whole point of giving up some control. It protects from turnover. So if you do have an individual or a virtual assistant who resigns, or maybe it's just no longer a good culture fit for you and you decide to let them go, once you've got your process documented, it is 10 times easier to plug and play a new individual. It creates clear alignment. Again, this is among virtual staff or internal in-person team members. Everybody's got to be on the same page with clear expectations. Now, the next slide is going to show you a sample of a standard operating procedure. This is really what yours should mimic if you're doing it on your own. You want it to have screenshots, visual guides. You really want it to show step by step. Here's how you complete every single task that you are responsible for. And it might seem like overkill, but the goal here is to be able to hand this standard operating procedure to either an in-person staff or a VA and say, figure it out, right? They should be able to plug into this with minimal guidance. It might take some initial training to get them familiar with the tools and the tech on the jump, but once they're really responsible for their own tasks and responsibilities, they should be able to follow this to a T without you sitting there guiding them.
All right, now let's talk about what you can delegate. And as Taylor so eloquently put it, you've got to be willing to give up and turn those tasks over. So we find, dealing with people such as yourselves, cold calling, maintaining your lead database is one of the tasks. Transaction coordination, as we've talked about with all of you in the real estate business especially, is the transaction coordination. And then think about your digital marketing. social media management, email campaign management. There's so much stuff. So generally what we'll do is we will challenge you to sit down and come up with that first 5 or 10 tasks that you're doing that could easily be done by a phone or, by somebody who's got access to a phone and a computer. So, I mean, obviously we can't go do showings and we can't do inspections and those type things, but anything that can be done virtually, we can go ahead and, task that, get those tasks done and get that staffed for you. The only thing, when you're talking to these third party companies is to make sure that, what these companies staff for. Because, for example, at Rocket Station, we don't generally staff for decision level positions and website development. So it's like we can do all of these administrative type tasks, but we can't build your websites, and we're not going to give you a CPA. We don't staff to the CPA level, but we do staff, for example, for people that can do your accounts payable or your accounts receivable entry. So really think about what you can delegate. And again, these are some of the most common positions that we see for people such as yourself. But really, I challenge you all to, go home later tonight and just think about all the things that somebody could help you with. So now let's talk a little bit about the cost.
And then,
So,
yeah, before
yeah,
Barb, just to clarify on this slide, this is going to be cost directly tied to Rocket Station. So your
right.
cost options, there's every third party staffing agency has different pricing metrics. If you hire directly, different pricing metrics. This is going to be specific to the Rocket Station costs.
Exactly. So what we do is we actually offer 2 different staffing models. We do full-time, which is $11 an hour, and that's 40 hours a week. And we also do a part-time option. So that's 20 hours at $13 a week. And when you look at this, and remember again, we are going to bill that to you directly. From the HR side, this again, no HR liability, no W-2, 1099s. You don't need to have an HR person on your staff to make sure you're following all the regulations that come with managing people. No employee taxes, no contractor liability, because basically we're handling all the HR and we're taking all that off your shoulders. And when you look at these numbers, it's really when you hire a virtual assistant, you are saving probably more close to 60, it's 67% less than it would be in the US. So again, because you are $11 all in, we charge a $1,995 setup fee. It's a one-time startup fee. But because you are with Investor and you're here at the webinar today, it's a $500 off that implementation fee. So really $1,495 to get started. But when you look at this, at the end of the day, there's so much cost savings as to opposed to when you are hiring directly. For example, even if you look at the time that you would have spent interviewing, going through all those processes. And again, I'll keep in mind as well that we're going to help you manage that employee and you're going to get that extra layer. Basically, you're getting an operations manager that is included in that. You're not paying for a second person to help you manage your team. So I think really from a cost perspective, just some things to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is specific again to Rocket Station, but the 67% affordability number, that is based on the same quality
Yes.
individual. So, right, we're talking about a college educated young professional. So that's where we pull that metric from. You're looking at a 67% cost savings on the hourly rate. And then again, if you might be able to find, it really comes down to what your needs are, right? If you find a third party who's more expensive, maybe it is that CPA level, right? So there's a reason when a third party is more expensive. If you find somebody who's cheaper, look into that, figure out why it's cheaper, right? Maybe there's less oversight or less assistance. If they don't have an implementation fee, figure out why, right? Are they not creating your standard operating procedures? Just figure out what your needs are and really find a partner that aligns with that.
Great
So,
point. Thanks, Taylor.
yeah. And okay, it looks like the format got a little funky in presentation mode here. But this is to walk you through the onboarding timeline. Now, this is what, again, our onboarding timeline looks like. This can be mimicked, right? So if you want to screenshot this, go ahead. It should be kind of a plug and play, even if you are hiring directly. So on the first well, first, let me preface and say that the typical onboarding time is about 2.5 to 3 weeks with us. So a brand new partnership, you're looking at a 2.5 to 3 week implementation commitment, which is what that $14.95 implementation fee covers. Now, during that time, you got a discovery call with us, right? You're reviewing your current org structure, best practices, figuring out really what that responsibility list looks like. And if you're doing this on your own, put yourself through a discovery call. As Barb mentioned, sit down, make a list, figure out what your responsibilities are going to be, and some of the key personality traits that you want in the individual. Just kind of walk yourself through some of those questions. Then the second piece, and again, this should be done whether you work with us, with somebody else, or by yourself, is to start the process mapping, and that kind of flows into process development. So we differentiate the two because the process mapping really does need to come first. That is, figuring out what the job description looks like, figuring out what tech and tools you need the virtual assistant to plug into. And then the process development side of things goes into the actual creation of your SOPs. So think of process mapping as like high level overview. This is what you need out of the role. Process development is the actual creation of your standard operating procedures, setting your KPIs, really getting into the details there. Now, again, if you're hiring directly, steps 1, 2, and 3 should be done before you start interviewing your virtual assistants. If you are working with us, the process development phase and your client interviews overlap a little bit just to streamline the operations. So as we're finishing the development side of things, we'll get you started with your client interviews, where you'll go through the profiling phase, the actual interviews, and then selecting the best virtual assistant for you. And then when you are done with, we'll call that that's really the onboarding before the virtual assistant goes live with you, right? So then 5 and 6 are kind of like you're onboarding that virtual assistant with you once you've selected them. So it's a little bit more of a go live phase. So the VA prep, this is where any client specific training should come in. All of the company logins and access, the text, the tools, all of that needs to be implemented. Reviewing your standard operating procedures and training materials, setting those KPIs, that's where all of that should lie. And then as you push out of onboarding and you go live and things are running a bit more smoothly, that is where all of the consistent KPI tracking and QA should come in. If you've got them on phone calls for you, you're going to want to do continuous spot checks on call recordings, hold them accountable to daily, weekly KPIs. And then the operational management, we do provide an operations manager who will oversee the entirety of the partnership for you. If you are hiring directly, you have to have some sort of oversight, whether that is you, whether that is somebody on your team. Hopefully it's not you. It's a lot, but at least somebody on your team who is responsible for holding your virtual assistant accountable. Okay. Now, again, the presenter mode kind of messed with the format here, but on the next slide, I'm going to have a QR code for you to scan, and you can download a blank 30-day onboarding checklist. So you'll go through and see the pre-hiring phase for screening and selection, process development, what you should do when you're going live. It's very comprehensive. There's going to be 4 different sections for you to review. You will not see when you download it, you'll see kind of like the check marks and the X's on the right side. So anything that has a check mark on this screen, Rocket Station takes care of for you. Anything that has an X is irrelevant if you work with a third party, because it's something like setting up your W-2. It's just not necessary if you work through a third party. So the goal of the checks there is to show you what going through a third party really takes off of your plate. So if anyone wants to scan this QR code, it will pull up, it'll have you put your name and email in, and then it will automatically allow you to download the empty 30-day onboarding checklist. And if you are planning on hiring a virtual assistant, whether that is, again, through a third party or independently, follow that checklist. Just print it off and have a mental note every time you click off one of those, and keep yourself accountable, right? That helps hold you and the virtual assistant accountable. And that is it. Thank you, guys.
I love it. Keep that QR code. I think that's a really, I've seen the checklist is very robust, because I think that's so helpful for everyone listening of because I think the onboarding is probably one of the biggest challenges. And I'd love to see some questions as well in the box. If folks on the call also want to connect with you guys in terms of setting up, discovery call or something like that, they're like, I need this. What's the best step forward on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way is, I mean, you can just Google Rocket Station. You will see a ton of different options to sign up for a discovery call with us. For ease of access here, if you just go to taylor.rocketstation.com, that's my direct calendar. We can hop on a discovery call, go through what your needs are. Happy to kind of just be a sounding board for everybody, even if you don't know whether or not you want to hire through a third party. If you want to go through maybe the pros and cons that are specific to you, then we can do that during that time as well.
Yeah. And I'd love to see some questions. You could put them in the Q&A box, but I want to just talk about the biggest challenge out of all the pieces of the puzzle, Taylor and Barb. What would you say is the biggest challenge that, people, I'm going to use women because that's our community, experience and really need to work through? Is it on the hiring? Is it on the onboarding? Is it the managing? Like, what have you found with all the clients that you've worked with? Because now you have a recipe, right?
Yeah.
What would you see as the biggest challenge and maybe some tips to overcome those?
Yeah. I think it might be the setting of expectations. I think it's very common to start with a virtual assistant under the assumption that it's a magic pill. And
Mhm.
it's not. It is not AI, you guys, right? It's a human being. And it takes some time to kind of find the right flow of things. So you're not going to be able to jump in and expect this individual to know the ins and outs of your business without putting in some effort on the front end. So it takes a little bit of a heavier lift on the onboarding side of things, which is quite literally why we exist, is to help take some of that lift off. But if you go into it thinking that it is a magic pill, you're gonna be disappointed. There's going to be gaps in the process and in the outcome. You have to be willing to kind of set, again, it really comes down to the SOPs, to setting expectations, KPIs, and giving that person some time to learn your business. It's the same
Yeah,
thing as if you're hiring somebody in person.
Right,
sure.
and that's
And
what I always say.
yeah,
Think about it as somebody sitting at the desk next to you. But, and again, be willing, as Taylor said, the expectations to be able to set and reset. Because, it may all sound good in theory that this is how we think it's going to work. And then in practice, it may need some tweaking. So always being willing to make those changes and, have somebody that's willing to work with you to make those changes is really the important thing.
yeah. No, absolutely. And you don't know what you don't know. So it is helpful to have that leg up. Questions. I know women in this group, I think, with regards to Sarah, I was asking about tips for documenting operation manual for a VA. Any suggestions there? I think you covered that a bit in terms of just the pieces of the onboarding. That slide, I think, could be very helpful for you, Sarah. Anything else there? I want to make sure we support her in that intention.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're not an organized individual, I would say it might be beneficial, if you're not detail oriented, it might be beneficial to hire somebody to build out your processes. If you are familiar with Canva, we
Mhm.
love Canva. I mean, I use it personally, we use it professionally. It is a phenomenal tool, and a lot of times it's a free tool that you can utilize to make a really clean cut process document. I'd say that's probably your best friend if you are building these out from scratch. And then screen record your videos, and then build out your documents from there. But again, it's not something you can skimp on, because if you skimp on one little detail, I guarantee you it's going to become a problem down the road. So if you're going to feel like it's overkill, just let it be overkill. Get everything down on paper. Remember that you might be handing this to somebody who's never done this before, especially when it's specific to your business. So it really needs to be detail oriented and clear cut.
Yeah, and I don't want women listening to this or anyone listening to this thinking, okay, because I'm not detail oriented or because I'm not a systems person, I can't get there. And you just might need a tool, support, and that's where it's holistic versus having to do it all yourself, because you're going to potentially really frustrate yourself in the process.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the tools are really helpful. Loom is a great tool recording and I know there's some great AI tools out there too now in terms of screen recording and recording kind of by task, if you will.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. And that's another good point is that if you are doing this yourself, keep it responsibility focused. Don't
yeah,
try to create one huge document around the entirety of the business. Keep it very specific and have, you know, a folder of 10 different documents. Keep it responsibility or task focused.
uh, Kim, this is a
Great
great idea. Hey, Kim,
suggestion.
I'm sorry. You want
So that was a great suggestion because otherwise you'll just get so overwhelmed. And then you have a sense of accomplishment too. It's like, all right, I got task one done, check the box and let's go. Now let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And momentum, life is all about momentum as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as an investor. So you get one little success, you actually want to do more of it,
Yeah.
versus like avoiding this big elephant. Kim, great question. She's asking, as a business, how do we expense the cost of a VA if you administer a 1099?
So if you are administering a 1099, I don't want to give you any incorrect guidance here. I'm not sure what the expense process would look like. So we don't do any sort of 1099s or W-2s here. It truly is just a service provider agreement. So it's quite literally like you're paying your phone bill. So when it's that sort of setup and there is no 1099, you can treat that as an office expense come tax time. I would dig into what the stipulations are around having a 1099 or a W-2. It's definitely not the same ease of writing them off as an office expense.
Okay, cool. And I just want to give a big shout out because Kim is someone who she's spoken at InvestorCon, and we also have an interview with her about becoming a self-managing landlord. So Kim, thanks for everything you do for our community. So definitely might be a question for your CPA potentially
Yeah.
as a follow-up, but cool. Thanks for asking that question. With the few minutes we have left, I want to make sure I see in the chat box again. Well, first off, Taylor, do you mind just sharing where people can connect with you further, real
Yeah.
quick, and then I have a couple of things I wanted to wrap with.
Yeah, let me, if I could get out of the screen share, there we go. So I will just put this in the chat here. I'll put
Okay.
the link to so we actually do, we've got a team of individuals based over in the Philippines. Right now, their names are Joy and Bianca, two women who are in the same exact position as myself. So I'm going to share the general discovery call link for Rocket Station.
Great.
It'll either be with one of us four.
Great. Awesome. Good stuff. So in the chat box, I want you to share one thing you learned and one thing you're going to do as a result of today. Because all of these educational webinars are great, but if you don't do anything with what you learn, then it just goes on deaf ears, and and that's really moving the needle forward on your creating your business, building your investments, and creating the life you want. It's about creating the life you want through real estate, right? That's what we're all kind of doing. That's what we're all focused on versus it being this arduous job. And that's what I think growing a team through, as Taylor and Barb have talked about, is really what it's about too. So I'd love to see in the chat box a takeaway, something that you learned, something that you're going to do as a result of today. I'd love to see that in the chat box. And I want to just encourage everyone. We have, for those who are new to our community, you just put new in the chat box too. I know I'm giving you guys a lot of things. Hey, Christina. Christina is one of our chapter leaders. We're excited to have you here. Learn the benefits of hiring a third party. Very cool. Thanks for being here, Christina. But the other thing I wanted to share with you all, that we have lots of different resources, lots of different things that we're committed to doing at InvestHer. If you're new to our community, we have our podcast, we have our free Facebook community, we have our InvestHer chapters, which are really our meetups that are happening across the country. We have a lot of really, really exciting things that we're doing in the works, so stay tuned. And then we also have our mentorship program, our Strive mentorship program for women that are doing 5 to 10 deals, but really want to grow in a really effective way. And I know, Taylor, you've connected with a lot of those women because a lot of those women are also have have a portfolio and they're just doing it all themselves, and they're just tired of doing it all themselves. And that's the key, right? Is to build around you and build in a really smart way, which I love the model that you guys have, because it's more than affordable, right? Cost versus value. It actually puts more money in your pocket. Kim, awesome. I'm now clear on the role of a third-party company and their value add to the VA process. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to get involved with working with a VA, but I think time is money and women don't have time to waste. So I think there's value always to saying, okay, what is my time really worth? And what's the value that I'm getting? And I think we all need to be mindful of the cost versus value conversation with everything. Sometimes I'm a cheap person normally, but I've become less cheap in saying, okay, what's the real cost of this? It's not free or what have you. It actually cost me quite a bit. But what's the value? Wow, I'm going to get some time back that I can go and grow my business, grow my wealth. So very cool. Well, thank you so much to both of you, Taylor and Barb. Appreciate your time, appreciate your expertise. I know, Taylor, you're involved in our Facebook community. So as you have follow-up questions, tag Taylor. I'm sure she'll jump in. The one thing that I love about how you guys approach things too is that you're here with us, right? You're not just some company on the side, and this is the last time you're going to hear from Taylor. They've really not only what I love what they do, but they're really committed to our community and serving the women in it. So please tag her. I'm sure she'd be happy to answer a follow-up question within our Facebook community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Never hesitate. We're happy to be a sounding board, even if you have questions about hiring directly.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much, everyone, for being on, and we'll see you around the community, and do something with what you learned, and to have a great rest of the day. Okay.
Thank you guys so much for having us.
All right.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Take care, everyone. Bye now.
Bye-bye.